Across Russia, the internet isn't just censored, it's being switched off. What began as temporary anti-drone measures has now turned into hundreds of blackouts every month. Entire regions are losing access, shutting down payments, deliveries and remote working. Today, we'll talk about how Russia's shutdown system works, where it's happening and the real cost to the Russian economy. Hi, welcome back to the channel. In today's episode, I want to talk about how the internet, or the lack of internet, is affecting the growth of the Russian economy. Now, this issue actually started officially because Russia was worried that drone attacks were going to bring down the whole of the internet system. So they strategically were closing down certain parts of the country. However, this has now become so commonplace that there are questions being raised as to whether or not this is genuinely to protect the internet from drone attacks, or if this is simply a way of the Russian authorities controlling what's going on with regards to the spread of information. But obviously, if you don't have access to the internet, it's going to have a huge economic impact because everything is online these days. You think about the amount of time that you spend online buying things, researching things, having a look into things, watching YouTube, watching people like me on YouTube. It's a huge part of everybody's life. So if you didn't have access to the internet, if you literally couldn't go online, it would have a huge economic impact. Now, in terms of how is this being operated, what's going on? Well, the government in Russia has built a central control system for all internet and mobile traffic, and every single internet provider and mobile operator is now connected to a national monitoring hub run by the communications regulator. And this allows the Kremlin to slow, block, or completely cut access to any region within minutes. Local governors or security agencies can trigger these shutdowns under the excuse of defending against drone attacks. And the system cuts data in 4 different ways. They can either order mobile operators to disable mobile data for specific regions. They can throttle or block apps such as WhatsApp, Telegram, or Google Maps. They can reroute traffic away from certain regions so nothing actually loads on your mobile or your desktop or anything that you're trying to access the internet via. Or they can turn off mobile towers around air defense zones, which basically then just means that the signal drops out and nobody has any internet access. And a new rule now automatically blocks foreign SIM cards from using mobile data for the first 24 hours after entering Russia. Now, this is said to be for security reasons, but it also cuts off tourists and foreign workers from the grid. So when did this all start? Well, in 2019, the Kremlin actually passed a legal ruling saying that it had the power to shut down the internet. But it didn't really do anything with that power until the war in Ukraine started in 2022. And in 2025, the number of shutdowns has exploded. It's really taken off over the past 10 months. And we're now talking about hundreds of blackouts every single month, with some regions losing entire days to blackouts. And it's been recorded that over 650 separate shutdowns took place in June, making Russia the world's leader in deliberate internet blackouts. And outages often coincide with major public events or Ukrainian drone attacks, suggesting that this is coordinated with the military. So where is this happening? Is it just in specific regions or is it across the whole of Russia? Well, initially it was isolated to just those regions that were bordering Ukraine. So Belgorod, Kursk and Bryansk were the first that started suffering problems. And they had repeated mobile data cuts during air raids and drone attacks, so everything went into blackout. And residents complained about not being able to go online, do things like banking and shopping and just the normal everyday thing that you would want to do. So quite inconvenient if you were living in those regions. It then spread to the industrial heartlands when Ukraine started to extend the range of their drone attacks. However, today it's all across the country, and Moscow itself has suffered from 17 shutdowns in the past 2 months. So if you think about that, in 2 months, we're talking about 60 days roughly. If you had 17 days out of the last 60 where you weren't able to do anything online, so this isn't just your mobile data, this would be affecting your broadband at home, at work, anywhere, really. You wouldn't be able to communicate with people. You potentially couldn't message people. You wouldn't be able to check anything on the internet, do any shopping, do any Teams calls or Zoom calls or anything that you might want to do with your work. So this is going to have a huge economic impact on the Russian economy. Now, in terms of the economic impact, let's have a look at all of the different sectors of the internet traffic that are being affected. Now, the biggest impact has been on e-commerce. If you think about what you use the internet for, it's probably to buy things online. Maybe you go to Amazon or some other website and buy things and have home delivery. It's made things much easier than having to go to the store. And e-commerce is a huge business for lots of different countries, including Russia. And online retailers have had major problems because people can't get onto their sites to actually buy stuff. But even when they have bought things, when the internet goes down, those online retailers can't track where the deliveries are, they can't manage their logistics. So it's causing problems not just with the initial order, but also with the actual carrying through of the order and delivering it and making sure that somebody knows that it's been delivered and you've got that photo of the parcel on your doorstep, all of those sort of things. And it's estimated that the monthly cost of the shutdowns that are occurring at the moment is between 60 and 80 billion rubles per month. So that's around about $1 billion lost from sales that are impacting on the Russian economy. Now, banking and payments is something that we're all familiar with using online. I think most of us have apps on our phone or whatever it might be. You might do it on your desktop where you go on, you make payments, you check your money, all of those sorts of things. So in the same way as e-commerce, there's the initial problem of people not being able to go online and make those payments. But there's also business issues because if the internet goes down, then the banks can't talk to the terminals that are in stores. So you have whole EPOS systems dropping out in stores. So even if you go into the store, you might not be able to pay with your card because the system's out of order. It's just not working. And so everybody then has to go back to using cash. But how do you get money out of the cash machine if there's a problem with the online system? So there are multiple different impacts that are feeding through the economy of not having online access. And it's estimated that the impact for banking and payment systems is around 25 billion rubles per month. Now, small businesses and remote working have benefited hugely from the growth of the internet over the last 10 years, particularly since the COVID-19 pandemic, when everybody became familiar with working remotely. You could just join a meeting online, everybody could be at home, happy days. Obviously, you can't do that if you don't have the internet. And this is causing major problems for lots of businesses. They're having to work around not having access to online systems. So, an absolute nightmare. And it's estimated that this is costing business within Russia 40 billion rubles per month at the moment. Now, energy and transport also relies upon the internet. So when you're talking about railways or buses or various other forms of transport and then energy transmissions, everything needs online connections and systems. So if it suddenly goes off for 4 or 5 hours, that can have knock-on implications in terms of potential blackouts, not just internet blackouts, but actually power blackouts. You can have the railway systems being thrown out because they're not being able to talk to each other to see what's going on. If there's delays in trains, how do you actually communicate that to other people? And it's estimated that the impact on energy and infrastructure is costing 30 billion rubles per month. So in total, we're talking between 150 and 200 billion rubles per month negative impact on the Russian economy. So that's roughly in the region of $3 billion every single month, just because the Kremlin is switching off the internet at certain times because, well, officially it's because of the drone attacks, but it might be for other reasons. So what's the summary and conclusion today? Well, I wanted to post this video because we've been talking about the multiple different implications on the Russian economy of the war in Ukraine over the last 3.5 years. However, I don't think we've talked much about the internet. But in today's video, we've talked about the fact that the Kremlin introduced a law back in 2019, so before the war in Ukraine started, enabling it to have a kill switch to basically create blackouts in any area that it wanted to in Russia for security reasons. Now, officially, since the war in Ukraine has been raging, it said that because of the drone attacks, it would need to bring down the internet in certain regions. Now, I don't know whether that's because those drones were suspected of trying to use 4G or 5G or the internet in Russia to help hit the targets that they were going for, or whether it was just because they didn't want people messaging each other, or maybe in the regions they didn't want messages being sent to Ukraine, maybe some sort of intelligence type thing. There's no real official explanation as to why Russia feels the need to take the internet down when there's a drone attack coming, but that's what it's been doing. So initially, this was just happening in the regions that border onto Ukraine. However, over the last 3 years, it's suddenly become more widespread. And in 2025, it's really taken off. And in June, we saw over 650 separate incidents of the internet being taken down. And that is a world record. So no other country is doing this as much as Russia. And of course, the implications of this for the Russian economy are really damaging, because if you think about how your life has changed over the last 20 years, how much you've become reliant on the internet, I would bet that if you didn't have the internet for a week, it would have a huge impact on everything that you do. I mean, just the fact that you're watching this on YouTube means that you're currently online, because you can't watch YouTube if you don't have access to the internet. But I think that's a small sort of entertainment information side of things. But if you think about it from a commerce point of view, how many businesses have now gone all in on the internet? So many different businesses are solely done online. Amazon, although it has opened a few stores here and there, is basically the biggest online retailer in the world. When you think about buying something, I think most people's initial thoughts are, oh, I wonder if I can get that on Amazon. Can I get it delivered by Prime? Will it come today? Will it come tomorrow? You just expect that you can just jump online, order something, and it will appear at your house. However, if you didn't have the internet, if it was wiped out, if it was suddenly taken off you for 3 hours, 5 hours, a day, a week, then that would change things materially. And so many businesses are totally reliant on the internet, not just because people want to go on and buy things, but they've set up their systems, their logistics, their supply chains, their meetings since the COVID-19 pandemic. I think we've all become more comfortable with having a face-to-face video call, whether it be on Zoom or Teams or any of the other platforms, FaceTime, all of those type of things. It's just become part of everyday life. But suddenly, if the government decided to start shutting down the internet in your region without telling you in advance, it just suddenly disappeared for the rest of the day, it would have a huge impact on everybody's life. And as we saw, it's having a massively negative impact on the Russian economy, potentially around about $3 billion per month being wiped off because the internet isn't available. And that's equating to around about 2% of GDP over the course of a year. Now, that is a huge impact. And this isn't because something's happening that Russia doesn't have control of. This is the Russian government deciding to implement these blackouts to take the internet away from businesses and people in certain regions for whatever reason it decides to do so. So this is essentially self-inflicted on its own economy. And the Russian economy is already on its knees. We've talked about this a lot recently, but Russia is seeing a huge fall in oil and gas revenue at the same time that it's continuing to spend large volumes of money on the war in Ukraine. So the deficit is rising. It's spending more than it's earning. So the last thing that Russia really needs at the moment is to reduce the income that it is earning by switching off the internet multiple times every single month all across the country. But that's exactly what it's doing. There's no good explanation as to why it's doing it, but it is definitely shooting itself in the foot economically. And the longer that this goes on, the worse it will be for the Russian economy at a time when Russia's already struggling for cash. So the overall summary is that switching off the internet probably isn't the best idea economically, but that's what Russia's doing, and that's reducing its GDP potentially by up to 2% in 2025. So hopefully you've enjoyed today's video, you found it useful, informative, and thought-provoking, which is what I'm trying to get you to do, think about things in a slightly different way, so hopefully it's working. If you've liked what I've said, then please give me a thumbs up. Thank you for watching this video all the way through to the end. Please subscribe if you haven't done so already. I know lots of people haven't subscribed, doesn't take a second. Please just hit that red button, get on the subscriber list, it'll help me with the algorithm. But thank you so much to everyone that's supporting me. If you've moved over to Patreon recently to watch these videos advert free and early, then thank you for that. If you're a YouTube member where you can also watch these videos early, then thank you so much for that. And if you've bought me a super thanks or a coffee or joined up as a Buy Me a Coffee member, thank you for that support. And here's something to put a smile on your face.